I really feel like I had a very wonderful and blessed childhood in many ways. Two older sisters, we had a wonderful home and a huge neighborhood with probably 30 or 40 kids. Really a sweet childhood. No fences in the backyards where I grew up back in Michigan. But as I turned around 9 or 10, we had some tragedy strike our family that really changed the course of my life. My mother got breast cancer at a very young age, and that brought out some struggles in my parents' marriage that I don't think either of them anticipated. I think my mom became very emotionally devastated by this, as you can understand. And my dad found himself very ill-equipped to deal with that. They ended up divorced, and I ended up living with my mother, and she became very unstable, and in fact she became suicidal. Eventually, after a few suicide attempts when I was 13, she ended up taking her life. I had a little premonition about it. She sent me out to go on an errand, and I could tell by the tone of her voice that there was going to be a problem. And so I walked away. I got about a mile away to the errand, and I heard an ambulance, and turned around and just sprinted home because I knew exactly what was going on. For probably a year after that, I had that feeling like when you're in a chair that's tipping backwards, but it hasn't fallen yet, very lost, very cold. I moved in with my father, who was engaged to be married, and the gal that he was engaged to had no idea that there was going to be a redheaded stepchild living with them. So I am the redheaded stepchild. At 13, almost 14, I had a motorcycle, wild hair, playing guitar, and I was a handful, I think. So I came into that situation, and she really wasn't equipped to deal with that. And I can't really blame her. It's a lot to take on. But I went from a very unstable mother, it felt like a very unsafe situation, to a particularly critical stepmother and parenting figure. And that has really shaped a lot of my adult life and some of the struggles I dealt with in terms of intimacy with a woman, and to be comfortable with that, because it wasn't a safe place for me. So through my 20s and 30s, I had a series of dating relationships as I went through college and medical school and residency, and found myself really an emptiness inside of me, despite the fact that growing more and more in my knowledge of God and I became a Christian at age 18. But nonetheless, I felt just kind of growing, just a loneliness there. And here I have all this college education, and I couldn't figure out the most obvious thing, which was that I needed so desperately to be loved, but I couldn't receive it. The coolest thing that happened was that I spent some time and some counseling to understand how I was wired, and just deep meditation on who God was. I have a loving Father. I have a Father in heaven who's chosen me, who's called me, and I am deeply loved by God. That changed me completely, and that also really opened a door for me to be able to receive love and to give it. The woman I ended up marrying, Jill, was my best friend for years, and I think that allowed me to trust her in a way that I hadn't been able to trust other people. So God very clearly used my wife to break down those barriers and bring me to a place where I could be loved. I'm just so grateful for my 3 stepdaughters, Jay, Jed, and Leah, and our 2 youngest ones, Issa and Annabelle, and for my dear wife, who is 100% committed to me no matter what happens. From my experience, I would tell you that the sweetest thing that can happen is to get to this quiet place where you can be still before God and just bask in the love that God has for you. And you will find a God that's bigger than you could imagine, and a God who cares for you more than you could dream of, and a God who has a plan for your life, a really wonderful adventure of a plan that's better than anything you're going to come up with on your own. That's what I've found.